Real Entertainment Network.
Iron Reese. The talk is still real. We still on the corner. We gonna touch on some topics.
SKN, we got topics. Let's have a discussion. The people got questions. The people want answers. Yeah, we got topics. Let's have a discussion. The people got questions. The people want answers. Yeah, it's real talking. It's real talk. It's real talking. It's real talk. It's real talking. Real talk. It's real talking. Real talk. Yeah.
Iron Reese. The talk is still real. We still on the corner. We gonna touch on some topics.
It's real talking. It's real talk. It's real talking. It's real talk. It's real talking. Real talk. It's real talking. Real talk. Yeah.
Check it out, you know, in tune.
My daddy made this beat.
Yo, check it out, you know, in tune to the dynamic duo. Reese and Ira on the corner. Real talk corner.
Real Entertainment Network.
Iron Reese. The talk is still real. We still on the corner.
All right. All right. Reese, how are you, man?
Man, I'm great, man. How you doing?
Live and lively. I'm doing great,
So,
you know.
sounds good. Sounds good.
Hurricane party, you know? They call it. Hurricane
That's what,
Hurricane party.
that's what they call it.
Yeah, the hurricane
How we
party
get,
coming up.
I get to talk about that.
I don't know. I know that tell the little one he must stay home, but I still have to go report to work tomorrow. So, how does that work?
Somebody got to stay home.
I mean, I'm home, but I'm gonna be
See, so
home with
you
a
know,
toddler running around. I have a toddler running around, and I'll be at
it's like that
home.
sometimes. But
Yeah, but how's everyone?
everybody's good, man. Everybody's good. Can't complain. Get ready for this
Oh,
little storm, you know. This little bit of rain that will come. Make
we
sure I
need the rain.
stock up on my essentials. You know,
We,
um, my
and I think
water.
that's the idea of it, right? Pump some money in the
Mhm.
economy that people spending.
You know what I like to say. I like to see people who buy things that they don't need. You know, they go to the store and they panic, right?
Yeah,
And it'll be funny when you look at them, you know.
you like
Um,
that?
it- yeah, it's entertaining. Yeah, it's entertaining to me. And anything that's entertainment, I like it.
I guess that's why you're part of Real Entertainment Network. And then
Yeah,
tonight on Real Entertainment Network, we have a guest by the name of P. Clayton Huggins, right? P. Clayton Huggins. He's involved in the arts in Nevis. So he has his own gallery running. Amazing gallery, amazing artwork you could find in that gallery, Reese, if you ever get a chance and you're in Nevis.
sounds great.
Um,
Sounds great.
he's an actor that did some work with MSR Media as well, and you know he designed furniture. You know he also you know is a festival organizer. And he's just gonna tell us a little bit more as we dive into the arts in Nevis, and where we at with the arts in Nevis is where I want to take this conversation more. So, um, the arts is a little more important than a lot of people realize, and I don't think we pay enough
Very
um,
true.
attention to the arts and the purpose of the arts and what arts do for society and telling the storytelling and all of that good stuff, But I'm gonna open it with a scene that he played in for MSI Media. So this is local stuff, and then we're gonna bring him on and we're gonna have a conversation with him. All right.
Golden Rock is a magical place. Back then, it was a secret place where artists, intellectuals would come to get away from the limelight, having long conversations without. Well, it's nothing short of remarkable. Your father was a humanist. You would see him with politicians you would not expect to be together, arguing back and forth. But what he really, really loved were artists.
All right. So what he really, really loved as artists, and here we have Mr. P. Clayton Huggins. Sure, welcome to the platform, sir. We're ready to have
Welcome.
a
Thank you.
health, healthy and
Thank you for
hearty
having me.
discussion with you. Of course, some people may not know who you are, and some people may know who you are. I first met you in Charlestown. I saw
Yes.
you during the Poets of the Square event that you
Poets
have
in the
been,
Square.
yeah, Poets in the Square. So,
Yeah.
but I'm going to give you a chance to let the people know who you are. Usually, what we like to do is start from a childhood, because it gives us an idea of who the person is that we're talking to. And also, how did you get to where you're at now? So I know it could be a lengthy stories, but let's try. Let's do it.
We've got 2 hours. Well, I was born in Newcastle, and I like to say the little wooden church at the end of Shaw's Road in Newcastle is where my parents, both of whom went to seminary in Jamaica, began their ministry. And there's a little wooden house in the yard where my mom gave birth to five of her 6 children. And we were there. I think they were there for maybe 13 years, and then we were transferred to Sandy Point in 61. And my dad, the story I'm told is that it was no fault of his own, was dismissed from the ministry, and we ended up in Toronto. So I went there as a teenager, and I spent most of my life in Toronto. There's a connection to being, I'm involved in the theatre. I was president of the Nevis Theatre Guild. I'm now vice president. We're transitioning that theatre. So I've acted on the stage, been involved in production, directed for the stage. And I have to give credit to Esther Brooks, who spends her time between here and New York, who had asked me to help her run the theatre. And she kept telling me, oh, you're an actor, you can be an actor. And I kept saying, no, what are you talking about? And she finally got me to go on the stage for a play I think she wrote. And I know Amber Trott, who had spent 50 years on the stage, was in the back of the theater. And about 2-3 days later, I went to see him. And he met me at his gate with 3 pages of handwritten notes. He said, I know you're coming to see me, so I came prepared. And I'd gone with the idea, if he had given me the thumbs down, I would never be on the stage again. If he had the thumbs up, I would, because I would accept his judgment. And he had some interesting things to say, referring to his notes. But he said the thing that struck him was that when I appeared on the stage, he could not take his eye off me, that I had stage presence, as he called it. And so from that, I decided, sure, I do all the roles on the stage. But one of the traditions in the Pilgrim Holiness Church, or the Wesleyan Holiness Church, which is where my parents were ministers, was that they would translate passages from the Bible into morality plays. And so every year they were called pageants. Every year there was a pageant. And that tradition still exists in that church today. And I remember as a child helping my mom to do paper mache designs for the theater productions. And I think that that describes why or how I ended up in the theater. Um, I paint. I went to art school in Toronto. And hold on, I can hear a child in the background.
Yeah, yeah. Don't worry about that. That's my child.
Oh,
I can. Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
Okay. I went to art school. I was given my first painting set before I went to Toronto by my mom. It was a watercolor set. Um, and I have no pieces of work from that time. Um, I designed furniture because when I was born in Newcastle, at that time, you didn't go to TDC or Hosford's and buy furniture. Every village basically had a joiner and someone who can make furniture, so on and so forth. So when I left my father's house in Toronto, it seemed the most natural thing to do and get my furniture made. The chair I'm sitting on was designed by me and made sometime in the late mid 70s. It was in the first apartment I had in Toronto on Bloor Street. So all the things I do are connected to my family of origin. My poetry, I have two collections of poetry, and this is the first collection, which is called Sky Blue Roof. And I'm showing the cover because um, both covers are, how do I do this? Are designed, have details from paintings of mine. I can turn the laptop around and you can see both paintings on my wall. And that came up by having since my publisher, who were a nice, good publishers, went out of business because of COVID, like many other businesses. And I'm currently looking for someone to take up the mantle of publishing my books. So they're not available. They're not available. They used to be available on Amazon and through Barnes and Noble. They referred me to a company which was completely automated. So when I spoke to them and tried to have a conversation, you couldn't. I got exasperated and just decided, I've had enough of that. Writing poetry or writing is an entirely different enterprise than publishing. When I was in high school in Toronto, I had a choice to either learn a musical instrument or learn to type. And I learned to type, and I think I was the only male in the class because I knew I would be a writer. I didn't know I would be a poet, but I knew I'd be a writer and figured I would need the skill of typewriting, and I can, type with all 10 fingers as a result of that. I've been writing now for 40 to 50 years. It takes me, I write maybe 6 poems per year, and it takes about, normally I write a poem, and the refining process takes about 18 months, where you just look at it and you change a word here. And for me, I know poetry, a poem is finished when I read it, it sounds like the way I speak. And at some point, I'll probably recite a poem or two for you this evening. So I do that. The gallery you saw me in actually is not owned by me. I'm a director, I'm associate director and curator, but it was founded by Deborah Tyrrell, who lives here in Nevis and, like myself, went to Toronto with her parents from Trinidad. And interestingly enough, we went to the same art school in Toronto, though not at the same time. And we connected some years ago and stayed in touch. Shortly after I came home, I ran into her and we stayed in touch. And when she started the gallery, I was there with her. So the gallery has been going for 10 years. I curate a show every Culturama, the 2 last weeks of July, 2 first weeks of August, where I curate local artists so that visitors coming home would have an idea of what um, we have on offer in terms of art. And this year we had a theme. There's a Chantal Miller who spends the time between London and here, um, coordinated a show along with an artist called Felice Roberts, who's out of the Bahamas. And she was here in April and had a group of young ladies. And from that seminar came out a show around identity. So all the paintings you would have seen in the show when you were here were by young, some in sixth form, some just out of school, all dealing with aspects of identity. And you will be happy to know that we had a visitor we opened the gallery for someone who was going to be leaving the island on Sunday, I think, or Monday. Monday, we came in, Deborah and I came on Sunday, and they bought a painting for several $1000s. So there's a young artist in Toronto, in Nevis, who has several $1000s in her bank account. So, there is that aspect of the art. You can actually sell the art. And that's what I also have started a little project with Ron
Charlestown Gallery, I think in Maine.
Yes, that's
so the Charlestown Gallery, Nevis.
Okay.
And the idea is to get young Nevisians who are between
I didn't know this exists.
starting out in life, who are
10 years you've been here.
homeowners, to get involved in owning art. And that's a process of getting them together, showing them what the gallery is like. I'm going to have them come to my house so that they can have an idea of what a house can look like, possibly look like if you've been collecting art for 30 years. I'll just share that with your viewers. This is one wall of art. This is another one. The table I designed, and the piece of furniture in the corner, which has my stereo equipment I designed. And that wall, you might notice the small painting is the painting I used for my book. And that one is also. So if you've been collecting, if you have an idea by looking at someone who has been collecting art for 30 years, it will give you an idea of, okay, so this is what I can do. I do not collect, there are people who collect art for financial reasons. I do not. I can tell you how much this painting is. It's not a painting, it's a fabric artist. So what looks like, paintings of little pieces of cloth sewn together. And I can tell you how much it is because it's the most recent acquisition, but I have no idea. But you can look at these paintings. If you assume a painting, you pay an average of $1,000 for a painting, over 30 years. You can have paintings always appreciate. You can have paintings that are valued at anywhere between $30 to $60 or $70,000, if you want to think of it in those terms. I just have a deeply emotional connection to visual stimulus.
And these are your
and
students?
I've always had that.
Your
As a
students
child,
that
when we were
painted?
in Sandy Point, I used to go to Pump Bay,
Yes.
sit at the edge of the pier and look at the sky
This is not part of the show. This is
at dusk. What happens to the painting, to the sky, and just be moved to the point of tears.
I've heard the name before.
And I still do
She's a
have that
fabric
reaction
artist.
to paintings.
Okay.
So you can collect paintings
all these,
because they supply some emotional
Wait, what?
need.
all of these are
Visual
pieces
emotional
of cloth
need,
sewn
or
together to give the
if you
image.
want to think of them as investments,
Okay.
that's
Oh yeah, I could see
That's
it.
okay.
When you go up, you get
So-
the details.
as I say, I paint.
Really nice.
I
Very nice.
found
After
that
the show
Poets
with,
in the
in
Square.
February.
Poets in the Square began
These
as a
pieces
discussion I had in Sandy Point
Okay.
with people.
You don't
who I
have
knew
anything
before
of-
I went
any
to
of your
Toronto.
own?
We were kids then. And we were talking about Sandy Point not being what it was like when we were growing up.
If you come to my
And
house,
I had a discussion with Troy Mills, who at one point was head of culture, and we were talking. There's a street, the main road, there comes to a Y in Sandy Point, and the idea was there's streets which join the main road
That one?
to that offshoot. And
You
in
wanna
one
buy
of
it?
those streets, I think it's called Millard Street, where
A
Manchester
depiction of the
Avenue,
Buckley uprising.
that seat,
Okay.
the
You've heard
house.
of it, but yeah.
In Sinket,
The
yeah.
idea was to
Yes.
get tents and
This
cables.
is by
And everyone
this
who had either
ambassador,
gone to
Mark
Sandy
Teacher.
Point High School or lived in Sandy Point and had a book would have those books on exhibit, and they
not for
would
sale?
No,
speak
I don't
about
know
their
why.
work. That there is only one road in
I had to
Charleston
choose all
that
of
you can
these.
block off and not interfere with
This is
vehicular
really
traffic.
fascinating. Look at how
And that's the
she
road
has the
which
paint
runs
to
behind the
almost
new
three-dimensional
Inland Revenue
just by
building
stacking.
behind, not in front.
self-taught.
And actually during
So all the
COVID,
artists
when
in here
we were
self-taught.
told to stay home and not
Except this
participate
year
in
she
life,
studied in the States.
I actually organized a public
This lady
reading
is from the
on that street.
Bahamas. She was here in April
during
to give
The time that we were
a symposium with Chantal
COVID.
and some young students.
rather normally
She
have
looks like coffee. These are coffee
Culturama.
stains.
So
Yeah. That
this year
stuff you
has
see
marked the
there,
10th year,
that's
and I'm
coffee.
happy to say that I'm leaving.
Yes.
I believe I've left
That's
it in
nice.
capable hands.
It's actually really nice.
Interesting, very interesting.
Happy to see you leaving.
The show is identity.
To just go in and recite it.
Does it switch out? Do you switch so you
perhaps
switch
giving
out in
advice.
here or
Yes, this is the show is going to be closed next Friday,
person
Okay.
who
and
will
then we
be
won't
running
open again until 4.
from next year.
that's supporting the square? A different one.
Yeah, this is by
I
a lady,
came
a
home
fabric artist from
about,
Nigeria.
I spent most of my life in
The green
Toronto,
and white.
but I came in
Yes,
04 in December on a
and
6-month
this
contract.
has to do with
I was
identity.
in 3 days.
I
in
haven't spoken
India.
to her
I
exactly
couldn't go back to
why,
Toronto.
because
I
this
have
is
no
all the
reason,
thing I was in Toronto.
no rational
Yeah.
explanation
But
as to why.
actually she lives in London.
But it's the
Okay.
best decision I've made in my life. And I've met a couple of other people.
That might have some.
Lionel Nolan, he's from here, because he's one going in arts.
This I find really
He has a book
interesting
about it.
because
I think it's
again,
called Black in
the
Scarlet.
same woman did the texture.
He did a similar thing. He came to look
How she was
around,
able to
and that was it.
get the,
And it says something about
paint
Nevis,
to have this
There's something
three-dimensional
about this
quality.
place that is deeply
It's a
spiritual,
mystery to me.
and it can grab hold of your heart.
And this one is not for sale.
No, that one
It
is
is done.
not for sale. The red dot.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not
you're
for
looking at
sale.
some of the paintings here. on screen.
Yeah, not for
Show,
sale. Yeah.
yes, yeah.
This one is this was a gift to the ministry.
Divisions and kitchens.
That room is not for sale.
I chose
There are
the
two other
paintings.
pieces and three other pieces.
I
I'd
went
like
to St.
show
Kitts
you.
and chose the paintings, and some of the paintings were chosen by, well, rather
Oh.
the artists were chosen by,
Oh wow. You had to see this one, love?
by Chantal.
This is actual
This
here?
is a particular
Or was this
bar.
here at the
Yeah,
bar?
it's extension.
Bendito.
Okay, extension.
And I think the eyelashes are also
You're
there.
looking on at the
I
screen.
think, yeah.
This is an interesting piece.
Very, very
And,
interesting. She
yeah.
did that one and
Interesting
the one with
that
the
real here or real fake.
So would she have done the one over here and
Is
let me look at the name?
No, these two are the one. The one she did these two. But this one.
This particular
that
painting
one
was
is
sold
by
on
the
Sunday,
same woman
and the artist
and the
has several thousand dollars.
texture
So this one has no price.
because it's very it's priced. It's well priced.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you can hear me, right? Yo, just checking in. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
When anyone
If you
listening
were to
to
say
this
that
episode visited Nevis,
The price is based on
certain
the
business
size.
jobs.
Okay.
That will give you an idea of how much.
Gotcha.
we normally close
Gotcha.
in. We're going to be open.
But
Remember, there's an
she's
African
again
artist.
self-taught.
Some of the
It's the fact that
pieces,
she's
the
able to
fabric
get
piece
the
that look
paint
like
to have this
the window,
texture,
that bit on
three-dimensional
artist. I
quality
think she was
Yeah.
born in
that I find
England,
so
but
fascinating.
emigrated from
Yeah,
Nigeria.
you know, I have
And she now lives in Nevis, and I will be
cousin
creating a show of hers
who
in
does
November.
artwork, and she would have loved this. And they didn't get out much well.
So
They
we
were
are
here.
all
She's actually from
reactive.
St. Martin.
I curated
So I
a
could put you
show
in touch
which
with her
was
too.
on
Maybe you could get a
large
piece of
She
her
has a
artwork.
painting?
Yeah, she has
has
some
this,
pieces that she sent to the
theme
government of
outside
St.
of
Martin
her mother.
that they now display
That's
in
right.
St. Martin. I could pull up some of her stuff.
With
Right. If you send me her
Married.
contact information,
Yeah.
maybe
It's very interesting and evocative play. Rather not play, but production or show. I also under the tutelage of Esther Brooks. The idea was to get several um, yearly theater festivals, and we had two. We were in the middle, I think, of the third when COVID interrupted. We have not revived that. But the idea is to, I think that this can be, excuse me, part of the economy, because if you have a regular showing, for instance, in um, Poets in the Square, we do get regional poets in. We have had several from Trinidad. We have had Adria Ahol from Antigua. We were in the process of getting one from Jamaica when we were interrupted by that misadventure we all went through several years ago. Um, One of the young poets he got from Trinidad was Cameron Bruno, who subsequently rather, went to New York and became a youth laureate when she was in university in New York. And we have had um, Darren Sandy, who is a very accomplished poet and runs an organization of poets in Trinidad. I think it's called the 2 Cents Worth or something like that. So that's a brief background into how I have. I mean, I have all of these paintings just because I didn't actually set out to collect paintings. It just seemed to happen by the way these things do. The first piece I have, which was a gift from the artist when I was in high school in Toronto. I went on, I think it was called a Teachers' Activities Day, and I went with the theatre arts teacher on a tour of the Art Gallery of Ontario and several galleries. And the tour was led by a friend of his. And I remember him saying, if any one of you would like to come and speak about art, you can come to my studio. And the tour was done in the fall term. And in winter, I remember going, this is Toronto in the 70s, so, it's like snow, 3 foot snow on the ground. And I walked up a fire escape type steps into his gallery. And I remember I opened the door to his studio, and he was in the far corner painting. And he looked over his shoulder, and all he said was, "What kept you?"
Mm.
And I asked him later about that, and he said, "Well, of all the students on the tour, you were the only one who could connect to the paintings and who could understand and follow what I was saying. So if anybody was going to come and talk about art, it would be you." And he gifted me a series, I think, of 5. Let me see if I can. The triptych you see above the yellow cock, that's one. And the one above let me see if I can get this right. This way. No, it's that way. That one. This one here. And there were woodblock prints. They were Christians. And if you look closely, one is of a dove, one is of the chalice, so on and so forth. So those were the first pieces I had. These are when I was in high school. I didn't have them framed until I had my own place. But I've been gifted this particular piece. Was gifted by a cousin of mine. My mom's first cousin lived in somewhere in Connecticut next to either Yale or Harvard. There's an artist, a German artist named Josip Elbers, who was the dean of the art department there. My mom's first cousin worked for many years in his studio. And when he passed, his wife gifted him several pieces, and his daughter gifted me this piece. So, but I mean, some of my works and some of pieces that I like and admire and have purchased. So.
All right. I'm just wondering, can you hear me?
And also my library, which has, when I was counting one day and I stopped at 2,500. So I think there are around 3,000 books in my library. And that, I think, again, it goes back to the culture of my family of origin, because my dad was a minister. He had these big, large reference books and Bibles and concordances, where there was always a space set aside in each home we live which was called invariably the book room or the study or the library, where he would prepare his messages. And I've noticed that all of us, all of his children, do have similar spaces in their house. I just have, I think, more than most. So, like, the walls. And I do get a particular delight out of seeing a wall, from ceiling to floor with books. But then that's how I grew up. So that's a brief summary of my look into my background and some explanation as to why I'm involved in the theater and why I'm involved in the Charlestown Gallery. The Charlestown Gallery is online. There's a Charlestown Gallery somewhere in the States, but we're Charlestown Gallery Nevis. So,
All right. I just want to make sure that I'm being heard. I'm not certain.
yeah, actually, I had my headsets out,
Yeah, I
and
think
now that I put them in, I'm getting feedback.
yeah, yeah, I hear the feedback as well. Hmm. I'm not certain whose end it's coming from, but let's see. Okay, so seems like it's coming from
No, it's gone now.
Clayton's end.
I can't hear it. No.
Area
Oh,
mic is
I
off.
actually can't. I can't hear you now. Oh, hold on.
Can't hear you. Not hearing
Not
you.
hearing you.
Yeah, no.
Technology.
For some reason, I think my computer is picking up the wrong mic source. I'm not certain, but anyway, show is gonna have to go on.
Okay.
Uh, um, yeah. So Clayton, I know we spoke earlier, and you had mentioned you grew up in a haunted house, though. What about the haunted house and the
Whoa.
influence of the haunted house
Whoa.
on your life? And to
Well,
Gigi, hold on, Clayton. Gigi, yes, all these art that you see, they're in Nevis. They're actually in Nevis, and quite a few of them, most of them, are done by Nevisians as well. All right, Clayton, go
you
ahead.
mean these species,
No, the one I
or
I
should?
think I
Oh,
I, I think she was talking about the gallery. I would,
okay. Yes.
uh,
Okay. Good. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Go ahead. The haunted house and the influence it may have had on your creativity as well.
Right, right. Because the house was very, very badly haunted. And I don't know if you
Hmm.
know this, most religious institutions are built on sacred ground. And sacred ground usually means ground where you can communicate easily with the other side. And usually that's where people are buried because they are a conduit between this and that side. And apparently it had something to do with slaves, either slaves were buried there or sold there or whatever. Anyway, it was not unusual for us growing up to hear like the cabinet with all the dishes fall over, and you go in and it's still standing. And I have memories of my dad walking through the house in his boxer shorts and his merino, reading from the Bible, casting out devils. Now, as a kid, you think this is fun because I remember as a kid I would you know, suddenly look as if I can see something and scream and take on. Of course, my sisters would, when they found out that it wasn't, they'd want to beat me up. But as if you grow up in that kind of milieu, one of the things it can teach you is that there's an unseen world which is real. You know, hearing the stuff um, fall over and seeing things appear in your room, you can understand very easily that there's a world which is real, but is not immediately, but is not physical. And that is a description of the world of the imagination. And I sometimes wonder if it does not describe why my siblings are so creative. My mom wrote a book about her life, and of her six kids, five
The
of us are
book.
published.
Can you, Clayton? Can you put the book up and move it over to yeah? There you go. Yeah, right there. Okay, got you.
She
Okay, you're
was
good now.
37 at, yeah. Now, what I want to show you is this,
Hold on.
because at one point, she was the only person in the Caribbean, in the West Indies, who had songs in a hymnal, which is the old hymnal used in the Pilgrim Holiness Church, in which she had music, where she wrote both the lyrics and the music. And this is so
Wow.
fascinating to me because she was, as I said, very gifted. She played the trumpet, the guitar, the keyboard, and I went to the Royal Conservatory, so I know how to read music. And I remember once asking her, "Mommy, how did you like?" She can sit in church and read music and play the music, and she said, "You know that the flat signs on the musical stave looks like a common bee." That
Yeah.
woman said, two little bees means this, three little bees means that. So she had figured out in her mind how.
Wow.
Yes,
Okay.
that's genius. That's genius. And my
Mm,
sister, one of my
that's
sisters was telling me recently that there was a guy who would play the guitar in the church. And one day, mommy took the guitar from him and started playing. And she said she had never heard guitar played. And you know that man never came back to church with his guitar, never
oh
played
wow.
again. Yes. So she was that. And her brother's son traveled the world with the Mighty Sparrow for 20 years, playing in his band. And he has a daughter who has, I think, three novels. They live in Texas. I have a cousin in London. He now lives in Maastricht, who's a photographer. He's the one who took the photo on the back of my book that was
Oh
taken by
okay.
him. And yeah, it's a lot of creativity in my family. In my immediate family, I think that we are as creative as we are because um, we grew up with that sense of the imagined world as being real, or that the unseen world is real. So I think it was easy, at least for me, I can speak to myself, it's easy to move into that world and out of that world, or to accept that it is true.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But
and
jumpy stories, man, we have lots of jumpy stories going on.
But I yes. So you brought up the zombie stories, but living in that haunted house and those zombie stories, how did that influence your creativity?
Well, as I said, I think it just taught me that the unreal world, the world of the imagination is real. And if you go there and you hear a line, which is how I write my poetry, or you see something, you can understand that that's real. You know, you don't think, you don't dismiss the imagination as, oh, it's nothing, because you've had the experience of, seeing stuff and, seeing apparitions and so on, and understanding that, look, there's more to life or more to reality than meets the eye.
aye,
And that, I think, made it, or gave me permission to enter the world of the imagination and to
yeah,
return with, you know,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I could see that. And
Yes.
his imagination is his reality more so.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So whereas thoughts that you may have had, and you may think, people might think these thoughts are wild out there for you. They're not wild because they're actually something that you live. So it's
Right.
it's oh,
Exactly.
it's just the norm for what it
Yes.
is,
Yes.
and he's able to express it. And so
Yes.
that was, you said that may not have been the case for your siblings, but um
Well, I can
surely
only
for you.
speak for myself, but
Yeah.
there's a woman named Zeta Elliott. She's a novelist and has written lots of books, and she was born in Toronto, and she's moved to the United States. She is a cousin of mine. Like I have so many relatives who are Stacy Tyrrell, mostly on my mother's side, but on my father's side, Stacy Tyrrell, who's a conceptual artist. I think she's in New York. She's a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
She's my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the genetic pool.
Is
Um,
is on your mom's side?
yes, and even
Okay.
on my dad's side, there's one or two who are creative. Yeah.
Okay. 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 So you so is there a particular part of the art that you have more affection to, that you enjoy doing more? Is it, you know?
Well, I enjoy all of it, particularly when I'm doing, like when I'm writing a poem.
Mm-hmm.
I I am so committed to it that I can very easily go into a trance-like state. When I'm on the stage, I find that deeply, deeply rewarding and very
Mm-hmm.
powerful. And there's a real energy to be had with that immediate interaction with the audience. And even as a director, you're behind being a prompter, whispering the words to the actors, and you can hear the audience members, interacting with the actors on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy acting very much, and I enjoy. I'm a glutton for pleasure.
Okay.
I enjoy it all, but I
Mm.
particularly like acting. If I, acting to me is very magical because I remember once looking at a film. This is when I realized what acting was. It's many, many years ago. It's called a film called The Flim Flam Man with George C. Scott. And I specifically remember pointing at the TV and saying, "Hold on, that's not the Flim Flam Man. That's George C. Scott." And it's a scene in a boxcar. But he had persuaded me that he was someone other than George C. Scott. And to me, that's really magical, to be able to convince someone that you are a character. I
Mm.
played a lawyer in a production we had called Lady Alcohol, and people were meeting me and asking me if I really was a lawyer, you know.
Mm.
And that to me is like magical to be able to transport people into the realm of the imagination and make the imagination real. And when I lived in Canada, every summer I would go to Stratford and Avon, which is a little town west of Toronto, and
Mm-hmm.
you'd see Shakespeare. There's a Shakespeare production. So I saw Richard III, Hamlet, and other plays. Yeah.
So in terms of theoretical productions, I would find that it's lacking in Nevis. That's just my estimation, right?
No, no, you're right.
Yeah. Uh, why do you suspect that we don't have more um, plays and uh, dramatize? Like the only time you see drama is during Culturama, and the queens can't
Because
find the talent, so they start dram- dramatizing. Have you
no,
ever
no, no.
offered your
The,
service as well for
uh,
Culturama, for the queens, and
No,
helping
what we
them with
normally have is we
dramatization?
normally have a theatrical production during Culturama. This is the first year that we haven't had. And usually
Really?
Culturama is so busy for me because I'm usually involved in the theater production, in points in the square, and in the curating the show. But Culturama was actually founded by NEDAX, which was a theater group, a theatrical group. I think the reason why we do not have it is because we do not have a large enough population
Mm,
to have people dedicated solely to theatrical production and being paid. Everybody works. Everybody has to work
mm,
9 to 5. And like our president and a man and person I nominated to be head of the theater group was at one point the head of Nevlec, and he still works there, but a gifted actor. So we have time to produce maybe 2 or 3 plays per year. If you
mm,
have 2 or 3 companies, which we do have, and each one produce 2 or 3 plays, you probably have 3 or 4 productions during the year. and that explains why you do not have dedicated
You would have,
theatrical productions.
you probably would have to be on the road more too,
Yeah.
because I guess you won't even have the audience to go and see the show. Like a show could be run a show could be ran here for multiple weeks, and the
Yes.
audience members are different each time because it's
Every time.
sold out.
Yes.
And
Yes.
in Nevis, maybe one or twice, and that's it.
No, no, no. But
Everyone's seen the show.
well, you do have a point, but I also want to make this point.
Hmm.
The theatrical festival that I had organized, there's a woman, she's born here. She has children, I think, are born in Toronto, and one had a show on Canadian TV and has a theatrical group. So I have
Hmm.
access to her. I could have invited her theatrical group down. We have
Hmm.
had groups from England come here and perform, and you've had the the the, the NEPAC Phil, which holds
Hmm.
has a capacity for 400, and they've
Hmm.
got one or two shows. So if in our theatrical production, having the theater filled 60% is a good is it's a good turnout. I've been there where you've had all the seats filled, but these are groups who have come in from London to perform. Um, but you know, if you have the regular theater going group in Nevis, which has such a small population, you can get that community in one sitting, as it were. You know, they might want to come back for that show a
Okay.
second time. Yeah, so that explains why. I mean, in a city like Toronto or Miami, with a population in the millions, you can have a show that runs for 2, 3 weeks and have a capacity audience each night.
Okay.
You can't do
Yeah.
that in a population of 10 to 12,000 people.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yes.
But
And
is it?
here, people,
Yeah. Go
some of the
ahead.
people here, it's always a labor of love because you can't do this kind of work like Esther Brooks is. Or she put on her first production when she was 11 years old. So it has to be within your blood, within your heart, for you to do it. Yeah.
And like you said, it's labor of love.
Yes.
So it's for most individuals, there's no financial gain. Most people are just doing it because
No.
they love the art,
Right. We
and
do not make
that
money.
no, no, carry on. Sorry.
No, we do not make money because we do have to pay for the venue. We have to provide. We have to usually pay for the production, for the lighting, for the sound, or buy our own mics and so on. Usually, at the end of it, there's very little money, if any, once we have paid for the people expenses.
Um, Someone in the audience said these things were not incorporated and highlighted more, especially when we had MSR there. I thought that would have been the main idea behind bringing them to help develop our theater quality, production, and camera personnel. So we could have more short films and movies like I see the young Jamaicans are now doing. I know Jamaica has a larger population, so they have overcome that one hurdle
Yes,
that we already have in
yes,
front of us. But
yes.
did you see any improvement after MSR?
Yes and no, not really. The reason why I ended up in that production was they came to the theater group to find actors, and myself, Javan Swanston, and Esther Brooks were chosen, and Esther and I had speaking parts. She appeared, I think, in two other productions, but they had started like a training for actors for film But I will tell you, the person who was doing the training was not an actor, no, it was just someone who was attached to them, a local person, and it didn't last. Um, MSR Media is it's an independent company who came here, I think, because they had their own production crew. Let's put it that way. And there were people like True Capo. I don't know if you know Nigel Lewis, True Capo, the guy who have done all those videos. He was attached to them. There was a young man who then became a DP, I think. I don't know if he went out to study, but I don't think that. I know there's James Galloway, who makes videos, makes films here. He was not attached, and I don't think he got any benefit from it. I think that was an ideal, that they would come and train people, but they had their own people. And the people who they wanted were people who had trained, whether or not they were actors or people like Nigel and so on, who, were there. But I don't know if Nigel found it rewarding, or he was being asked to do things that he knew already, because he has directed stuff. Yeah.
No, so Naira.
Yeah, oh yeah, that okay, yeah, I could see that. So Reese, I don't know if you had any questions in relations to production of theater or anything of the sort.
Well, my because like Mr. Huggins has stated, he has also directed um events as well. So when it comes to a theatrical performance, from beginning to end, how long does it take to get it all together? From you get the script to you actually be able to put the final product out for the viewing audience. Roughly, how long does it take for that to go for you to get that completed?
A rough question.
At least 6 months,
Wow.
because we're not a professional theater group. We have productions that go, maybe rehearsals that go twice a week,
Okay, yeah,
okay, or 3 times a week. And as we get closer, we go 3 times a week. And you have these productions that are done at night because people are working in the day.
yes, definitely.
But it's about, like, for instance, if we want to do something for Culturama, which is in July, August, we begin rehearsals around February. We have a table read, and then we just go into it, and then we have, particular scenes and so on and so forth. Esther Brooks is excellent. I mean, she's a professional. She studied theater. She studied film in New York. She knows what she's doing. And um, I had to do. There was a production that was done at NEPAC by um, NCDF, and I was asked by Kareem Herbert to do voiceovers. And at the end of it, I called Esther in New York. I said, "Listen, Esther, you've been such a good trainer," because repeatedly he will ask, I did everything in one take. He would ask, "Okay, this is what I want." And I was able to deliver. And that's the training that Esther gave us. I saw a production which came from England, and after see what we were talking about is, we can do that. So we're very well trained, and that I put down to, to Esther. And if you if you're doing a play in July and you begin rehearsing in February, and she's very serious. Like, I've seen her. There was this guy, we were doing a play, and he came late 3 times, and she fired him on the spot.
Hmm.
And one of his excuses was, "Oh, it was raining." Well, it was raining. We are all there, but
Hmm.
So you have to have that kind of seriousness of purpose, and what you will do, you will attract a seriousness of purpose. That theater group is about 18 or 19 years old, and the two or three people who have been with the group, with her, since it began. I keep telling her, it's because of your dedication. When you're dedicated like that, you attract a certain kind of person, a certain kind of character. And, she has trained us very, very well.
Um, as we speak about theater groups, I just had one more question surrounding theater and maybe somewhat of an idea. Has has there been any effort to go through the schools in Nevis and recruit uh, young talent, maybe put a production on with just young talent, get them involved from a very tender age, and you know, maybe one production, geared towards Christmas, geared towards Culturama, geared towards whatever, but just going through multiple schools, see who may be who may be willing, who is interested in students, and there you go. They're not looking for pay, at that point, and
Mhm.
they're young. We could have like a musical youths type thing.
I know at one point Esther Brooks was retained by the Department of Culture to go into the schools and teach theater arts, but the
Hmm.
education system here is not geared to creativity.
Okay.
It's geared to academics. And there's no art, there are no art classes. When I first came home, I remember going and speak. I didn't know who he was at the time, but actually it was Malcolm Gishard, the late Malcolm Gishard. And what I pointed out to him as a way to support theater is
Hmm.
what the government would do is for each production, the government would pay for a number of seats, a percentage of the seats, and have students who are in primary school, students who are in high school over the come and look. And what that would do over time is when someone is in primary school, they go to see a play. When they go to high school, they know they go maybe once every year to see. What that will do is this: when those students would have left high school, they would still want to see theatrical production, so they would pay to see them. And over the years of the school life of from elementary to high school, you'd have one or two, if you have just one or two or three students say, hey, I can do that. They may be
Hmm.
interested in acting or some form of production. That way you produce and build an audience for your work. And I remember speaking to him and I realized that he did not, you have to have a vision. And I'm going to recount to you a very interesting conversation I had with the premier. I think this was even before he was in politics. I think he was when he had just succeeded Malcolm. And I had a
Hmm.
conversation with him in his office, and he told me something that was very, very, very interesting. A lot of the guys here in government, they support the arts. But he told me, I was speaking in his office, he said, Clayton, you grew up in Toronto. You were exposed to galleries, you were exposed to all of this stuff. When we go overseas on business, when we have downtime, we don't go to museums and galleries. We go and hang out with the friends we knew when we were growing up who then move into those countries, which is very, very true. So one of the things I actually thought is to have them, the people in government, do art classes or do take part in a theatrical production. I noticed that they had the ministers recite this year at Poets in the Square. And that is a way to provide them with a little toe touch, toe tip into of what might be involved. But if you do not have that experience, I mean, I have all these paintings on my wall because, yeah, I've seen Renoir, I've been to galleries and museums and regularly. But that's because I grew up in Toronto. I didn't grow up in Nevis. And would I have these paintings on my wall if I had not grown up in Toronto? You know, that's a serious question to ask, and
Yeah.
it's a question I think which impacts why and how things get done in these small islands. So, to answer your question, there are things which can be done by people in government,
Hmm.
but it's not part of their experience. It's not part of their growing up, and unless they are, in a way, forced by our colonial masters who now are the Americans. If an American came in and said, "Oh, we'd like to do this," it probably will get done. But I guess it's up to us who are in the arts to encourage them to get involved and support the arts. And I know that Mr. Brantley support the arts because I know that he was spoken to personally, and he said, "Okay, I want this done." And I give him credit for that.
So the main question tonight is the arts alive? And then the second part, well, is it well? Is it alive and is it barely striving in Nevis? Or is it just not there? What's your opinion on that? And they're saying the audio is low again.
I
Let's
wonder if it is my audio. Remember, I turned it down because I found it loud.
No, I don't know.
Okay.
You sound the volume sounds high here, but
Okay. Okay.
I could add some gain. But yeah, so what do you think?
I think, for instance, when we every time we have a poet from overseas, there's a guy Idris Salim who came in, and when I went and sat with him with one of the senior administrators in the Department of Education, and what we were talking about is doing something around poetry in the schools. And what I gathered from her was, well, we would have to make time for that apart from what we have planned already. If the initiative isn't there from them, would it get done? I don't know. I had a conversation with Samuel Duggins, who is in the federal government and who I've known for 10, 15 years. And one of the things I know that I spoke to him about is to get a regular poetry competition in all of the schools in the Federation. There are only two high schools in Nevis. And that is, how do you compete? How do you do a competition with that? But if you include all of the high schools, all of the elementary schools in the Federation, you'd have a larger pool of talent to choose from. And I think that can be done. That can be done. I think what it needs is someone dedicated within the government to doing that. And I think that the people there already have their assignments. And those assignments does not include the arts per se. So that might account for why you don't have an art competition in school, or if there's art, it's like after hours, after regular hours. And what is so I used to have a show on Win FM, and what struck me was the depth of talent in the society, but no support exists for it in the government. And I know because growing up in Toronto, you'd be walking down the street and you'd see all these stars in movies being made because the government understood that having productions in Toronto and Ontario meant millions of dollars for the economy. And if we had one of the ideas of having a theatre festival was eventually to have a theatre festival where people would come to Nevis, or a poetry festival where poets would come to Nevis to hear poetry, to see plays being performed. That used to happen a long time ago. We would go to Antigua, take productions to Antigua, to neighboring islands, but it has fallen off.
All right, so in terms of theater, we touch on theater, poetry. You said you were gonna possibly recite some some poetry for us tonight, or
Sure, I can
or
do that.
give us a taste of P. Clayton and see how
Huggins.
yeah, P. Clayton Huggins, and let's just go in
Okay,
so that segue
I'll
into.
recite. Yeah, to poetry. Yeah. Well, let me recite one, and not surprisingly, it's called "Jesus Wept."
Hmm.
Yeah. Jesus wept, so the Holy Bible say. He cried in vain that his heart would lose its sorrow and his eyes their light. He had looked for guidance to his footprints, only to see the hordes pursuing him. Father, he cried, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He knew that he would live to see his dotage and his offspring flowering under his caring eye. He knew too that he would outlive the lie of his life. Jesus wept when he saw his heart bleeding water before him. He lifted his gaze from the ground, looked southwest, and longed for the comforts of home. Jesus wept for you and me. He knew the power of belief, and that you and I, if only to survive, would one day have to believe against our knowing hearts the lies spoken in his name. He wept that you and I would come to know that souls aren't for saving, and that heaven is here, right here in our empty hearts, if only we would listen, hear, and obey its gentle reminders.
It's
Yeah.
good stuff. Yeah, that's good stuff. Um, so that's like that's good stuff. So is that the quality of poetry that you see throughout the Poets in Square? Is it the Poets in Square
No,
even well attended?
it is well attended. It has been interrupted by COVID, as everything has, but we would have people who would come home regularly.
Hmm.
And, I remember once having a conversation with Noah Mills, who at one point was running Carnival. He said, Mr. Huggins, I noticed
Hmm.
you're able to run an event midday and have a full audience. How do you do that? Because normally, actually, it's the only thing that takes place during Culturama during the day.
Mm.
So, and it's held during lunch day. And we have a built in audience because there are banks and businesses around the judge. Actually, the judge K, the courthouse is next door.
Okay.
And sometimes you would see the judge, if the court is in session, come out and listen. And this year, I think him or his wife recited. So you have a built-in audience, people on their lunch coming to the bank, and as they're standing in line, whether or not they're in the bank or outside, they're listening. When there are people in the building next door, their lunch, you see them on the gallery, they're listening. There's a bus stop while people are waiting for the bus, they're listening. So it has a nice ambience. It has a built-in audience. And people, I know people who come home from Toronto every year and they come 1 or 2 days to listen. We
Hmm.
have regular poets who come from St. Kitts. Crichton Pension has recited, Lachlan Tatum. Heather Archibald, who is Washington Archibald's daughter, who is a professor in the States and is a poet who comes each year that she's at home. So it's serious. We've had poets, Adri Hall from Antigua, an excellent poet. As I said, Cameron Bruno. These are poets who have won events, big events in Trinidad. We were trying to get a poet from Jamaica. So it's vibrant, and I hope that the people who succeed me are able to keep the focus on poetry rather than, let's say, having it be a form of entertainment.
Mm.
Entertainment is very big in the United States. It's a way to distract the population, I think. And you see that in politics. I remember when I came home, I was astonished. I went to a political meeting and there was this top ranked Calypsonian from Trinidad. I thought, what the hell is going on? But you realize the influence of the United States in here that, you don't want people to think deeply as you don't want them in the United States. So I call it a culture of distraction. So you can sit in your lazy boy for 12 months a year and look at sports and get involved and excited about things which are not really deeply meaningful. So, and you see that influence here. And I would like the poetry, the focus to remain poetry rather than entertainment. And that's a subtle distinction, but a distinction to be made.
I've never thought of it as a distinction at all. When you're
Well,
saying I'm here trying to figure out, well, then you're gonna have to fully explain what is the purpose of poetry if it's not to entertain. What are the depths of poetry?
um, maybe I should read to you what comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
One of the poets who comes up each year from St. Kitts to recite wrote me a small note at the end of it, um, and I thought it was interesting. I sent him a note, said, "You did very well. Thanks again for your support over the years." And his reply was this: "Yes, man, and it was good seeing and listening to you recite topics that are non-sexual, political, or even cultural, real depth. You can
Mm-hmm.
go to poetry and hear things about blackness and identity and about politics,
Mm-hmm.
but you never hear, rather are not likely to hear a reflection of what it means to be human, what it means, the pain and suffering that we all go through, you know, what it means to learn lessons from life. The distinction I see between, remember, I grew up in Canada, in Toronto, and that's what I notice from the United States, that if you have the purpose is to make sure that people, this is how I interpret it anyway, do not think deeply about anything. Because if you do, you're going to start asking questions that the people in power don't want you to ask. Because, I mean, let me give you an example of what I mean. The reason why people in North
Yeah.
America are encouraged to look askance at Venezuela and condemn them and denigrate them for being socialist or communist is because the last thing the people in the United States want people in the United States to do is to ask, well, how come in Venezuela the attitude or the theory or the theology is that the natural resources in the ground belongs to the population, not to a group of people or corporations, so you end up with 10% of the population owning 90% of the wealth. I mean, if the people in the United States start asking those questions, that would be the death knell of the people who control the society. That's how I think anyway. And so the way you stop that is to denigrate those people and say, oh, they're this, they're that, and to condemn them. And that blocks any serious consideration, which is why, when the so-called socialists came into power, their attitude was, look, or if we pump oil from the ground, the population at large the benefits should accrue to them. So they had government paid healthcare, they had government paid education. Education was free. It's not actually free. You had housing that was subsidized by the oil revenues. You can't imagine something like that happening in the United States because, how would all the billionaires make money? And
Hmm.
that's how I think. So that's when I think of the United States. You have to remember, if you grow up in Canada, you grow up looking at, having a particular view of the United States. I didn't grow up in the United States. I grew up in Canada. And in Canada, they teach you about the United States. And there's undercurrent. You have to understand that the English aristocracy of Canada are people who are called Upper Canada loyalists, who are English speakers, Americans who came to Canada at the time of the Revolution because they were loyal to the crown. And they're the people who run English speaking Canada. So there's an undercurrent of looking down at the United States if you grew up in Canada. I mean, one of the things that if when you lived in Toronto and you took up Newsweek or Time, you were reading advertisements made in the United States in American dollars. And Trudeau said, no, you can't have that. We're a sovereign country. So they had what are called split runs. They had Time and Newsweek had then to go through the expense of having publications specifically for the Canadian market. And so, if one of the reasons why Canada became a very powerful center for musical production was that again Trudeau said, "Listen, if you want to broadcast in Canada, 20% of your content has to be produced in Canada." Before then, you didn't have Celine Dion or that guy Corey Hart. All of these bare naked ladies came up because you had to find material to broadcast. And there's a point when most people, Elton John, the Rolling Stones, were doing the productions in Canada because there were so many production studios in Toronto. And so when I speak of the United States, that's my background. It's informed by that sense that the United States, if you allow them to, they will come in and take
Mm.
over your country. And that informs my vision of the United States. So I
And
mean, I do see it. I do see it as, and that's how I see it. I ask myself. I remember as she was born in the States but grew up here, and she ended up in Montreal, and she was listening to CBC, which is the national broadcaster in the States, and she was telling me, it's so unusual to spend the whole day listening to people on the radio have an intelligent conversation. That was her description. That's what I grew up with, you know. Anyway,
all
that's
right.
that's that. So I mean, I
And
do have a different view of when I speak of it as being a culture of distraction, or where I see it as where you can't afford to have people thinking deeply in the
mhm.
United States about what's going on. So it's like shouting matches.
And I understand. So I understand fully. It's not that it's not entertaining. It's more thought provoking. And as
Yeah.
Yasan Tafari said, poetry like Kaiso was was means of the people, mouthpiece or messenger. It is used to educate, inform,
Yes.
evoke thoughts, and paradigm shift eventually sometimes. So it makes you think about things in ways you normally may not have. So and I guess with
Right.
current entertainment right now, it's very empty, and
Yes.
mindless. Mindless.
Yes.
It has no substance. You know,
Right.
it only it's only endorphin trigger. So
Right.
it just makes makes you short reaction. It's a drug. So
Yes.
they're using it
Yes.
as a drug. And I think you have spoken about the thoughts of the cartoon realms, and what cartoons have done to the
Yes.
young minds and those
Yes.
kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
if we can explore that if you wish, because one of the things I noticed growing up you have to understand the first 16, 18 years of my life, I didn't have access to TV. And I don't have a TV now. I think it's,
really.
yeah, you can look at something and tell by the nicknames what it is. It's the boob tube, the idiot box, the rock box.
Hmm.
It's a baby minder. So,
That's a baby.
but yeah, it's
Cheap childcare is what it is.
no, it works. I remember years ago, I had a friend and I was visiting. She was in the kitchen and she had a boy who was, I think, less than two, and he was playing on the floor. And I noticed that every time a commercial came on, he stopped what he was doing and watched the TV. And I asked about it, and she was surprised. And she said, "Oh, don't you know? Commercials are broadcast at a different frequency than regular programming. And if you turned your volume on the TV all the way up, I don't know if you can do that, you can hear the difference because it sounds loud and apparently it's geared to the frequency of your brain. I don't know if that's true, but
Yeah, that is a track. I mean, it does go up a few decibels once the commercial comes on. Yeah, it is a
yeah,
fact. Hmm.
yeah. I just found it dangerous. And again, growing up in Canada, the TV was different. You got a lot of programs from England. The comedy was different. I don't understand American comedy. I don't get it. But going back to cartoons, um, like in Living Color, a lot of the people were from Toronto who started that. The writers. There was
Oh,
right. There was a group called Juicy and the Quirk Pigs or something like that. They were guys from Toronto because they have a different sensibility in Canada around humor than in the United States. But again, what I notice about, I was talking to about what I notice about cartoons is that it's almost as if the population in the United States is expected not to use its imagination, but to substitute cartoons, populates its imagination with cartoon characters. And I find that very, 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 it's a very subtle form of mind control, to put it bluntly.
yeah,
Why I would not be exposed to that or not see through it, I don't know. Maybe it's growing up in a haunted house and seeing
yeah.
beyond the surface of things. But that's what I notice about it. It's like your imagination is being replaced by something, and it's like, no, I want my own imagination. One of the
Correct.
things I do, and one of the ways in which that works, and I don't know if you've noticed it, when we have these little phones and you type in, they
Hmm.
always make suggestions as to the word you would use. And as
Hmm.
maybe it's because I'm a poet and I'm concerned with words, I always use the word I hear in my mind, never the
Mm.
one they suggested.
You
And
could turn
that's
it
my
off.
little, that's my struggle
Yeah,
between, you know, being indoctrinated or being having that sense of sovereignty of my own mind.
got you.
And maybe it's a losing battle.
Mm.
But I do think, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I'm a reader and I'm concerned with words and concerned with having a sense of my own connection to the world of the imagination. That it's very important to acknowledge that and to make sure that what I am producing is what I'm actually thinking rather than being a conduit for someone who has written a software and using the phone, the suggested work. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, and I can remember um, being very, for lack of a better word right now, objective to going to like Disney World, and my wife would say, "Oh yeah, yeah, you have no imagination." I'm like, actually, it's different. It's the opposite. I'm full of imagination because
Right, right.
they're trying to create characters and saying I need to live in that world and that's my
Hmm.
imagination and telling me what my
Hmm.
imagination should look like versus me
Hmm.
actually imagining things for myself or creating my own
Yes, exactly.
stories. You know what I mean? And
Yes,
I said
yes.
I've always argued with her on this portion or debated with her, especially when it comes to like Santa Claus and stuff. I'm like, you're telling me to tell a
Right.
child that Santa Claus is real is
Hmm.
their imagination, but you're actually, when you tell them it's real, that is the reality that they live. If I tell them Santa Claus is fake
Exactly.
and they're pretending, then they're gonna have to imagine that this thing is a character, and
Yeah.
all the stories that they tell them is actually false. But we have to pretend
Hmm.
that it's real, and that's where that imagination is gonna come in. So the imagination it's the tooth fairy and all of those things that we don't have to make believe, we're actually making it reality, and rather than
Right.
creating our own stories, our own
Exactly.
imagination, we
Yeah.
just go with what society has given us.
As I like to
Huh.
say, Mickey Mouse is a rat, eh? Never forget that.
Well, they're retired. It's retired. It is retired. So we touch on poetry,
Yeah.
and acting, and so now,
Yes.
how did have you done work for others with furniture, furniture art, and that type of stuff?
No, I've done only for myself. I was once asked to do something for someone,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing came of it. But it's. I mean, basically, I can design anything I want. I design a set of sandals. When I came home, I had someone at the craft house made a pair of sandals for me. I can't wear them because the leather is not soft enough. It just digs into my feet. But I found a person who can, I think, make. Actually, I met him just before I met you down at the fair, um, and he makes all sorts of leather products. I think I'll give him a task of making something for me.
Mm. So so what I mean, what type do you use? Like mahogany? Is it all local stuff when you make your
It's
furniture?
all.
Or
Yeah, the guy who makes my furniture actually lives in St. Kitts in Hertfordshire, and when I was looking for someone to make my furniture,
mm-hmm,
I was quite surprised to find that many of these guys have did part of their digits missing, and I'm thinking, my goodness, those bandsaws are wicked.
mm-hmm. No, I think that's
And
normal.
to lose a finger because, oh my goodness, no. And
Yeah,
I
that's
thought, no,
normal.
no.
It's
Anyway,
normal
I
business.
met him through an artist, through Pierre Libert. And Pierre Libert, I have, I think, several of his paintings on my wall. And I chose him because I was speaking to him and I told him my place is empty because I will only have what I want. I won't just have any and anything. And when I said that, he was watching me and he jumped. And I realized he got immediately what I was
Mm,
talking about. And I chose him on that. And my choice was well placed because I remember him telling me, a lot of guys in furniture get misled because there's a lot of money in it and they go for the money. And he was telling me if he's making a piece of furniture and he's not satisfied with it, he scraps it. And that was impressive. When I gave him the task of building this table, he pointed out to me that, if I can indulge your audience, I have to take the headphone out.
mm-hmm,
If there are pieces of wood under the bottom running this way to brace it, because if they were not there, over time the table might move. And it's a simple, simple, simple thing. And he could have gone ahead and done it, but he pointed that out to me and asked for my permission. That impressed me a lot. And that
mm,
tells you, what kind of person, the quality of work you're likely to get from him, so on and so forth. So this has no nails or anything in it. Well, it's just I had the frame made, constructed. Let me see. I have the frame and it has wooden here, and you just press the top wood into the frame, and that holds it. I had the frame made by a guy here in Nevis. There does not exist the ability to what do you call that process of making this look silver in Nevis? So I just left it like this.
mm,
Um, these are pieces I collected when I lived in Toronto. This is from a guy who I met. There's a show called the One of a Kind Show in Toronto, which is held yearly. and it is. Um, he studied in Venice, and some of his work is in the Cornyn Museum in upstate New York. And so I purchased some of his work. I think this work, this is very heavy, is in won an award somewhere. But when you have a visual, when you have a love for visual stimulation, I guess it's a better addiction to have than cocaine or something like that.
Sugar, better than sugar, I tell you
What's
that
that?
much. I say it's better than sugar, I could tell you that much. Addiction for
Yes,
sugar.
yes. I met, and what people don't understand is that sugar is actually addictive.
More addict 8 times, yeah, 8 times more addictive than cocaine.
Yes, yes. I actually do not use sugar. I use honey, but I met a shaman in the early 80s in Toronto. He was from Africa, and he took me off sugar and salt. And I think that's because he could see what was coming. Because one of my sisters is, diabetic. And there's so many people here dying of diabetes. But then I grew up
Mm.
eating muscovado. Muscovado is a form of, in the process of removing sugar from molasses and sugarcane juice to the granulated sugar, one of the steps is muscovado, which it
Mm.
looks like, you know what Frago is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shaved ice. Well, it
Yeah, yeah.
has that kind of consistency. And with molasses, and I grew up eating that crap. So it's not surprising that there's so many people here of a certain age are diabetic.
Mm.
But I mean, I do have sugar in my house, and I get my sugar tested. It's normal, but on the low side of normal,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
it's. I do occasionally have, will have a sugar because you do need that. At least
The
I think you do,
glucose.
and yes,
A little
you do need the glucose.
yeah.
Yeah.
Your liver would produce glucose for you.
And what's that?
I said no, your liver would end up producing some glucose for you. It'll supply it,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
Is it your
But
liver or
I
your
do
something like that?
I pancreas. I think I do have your.
Pancreas.
I do eat natural sweets like bananas and mangoes and so on. But the
Yeah.
manufactured sweet is deadly.
Tell me about it. I live in a world of high fructose corn syrup, so
Oh
so
my
I
goodness! I
you live in a world of high fructose corn syrup. It's well. So you're handing off the poets. Why are you walking away from the poets in the square? Is it just time?
I'm tired. I've done it for 10 years, and I've not only done Poets in the Square for more than ten
Hmm.
years. I've done a monthly poetry reading. That's how I've had access to poets because over those years, there are people who have come, people who have left, who each month we have a poetry event. So when Poets in the Square came around in July, I had a coterie of, a dozen poets, maybe, to I can call from St. Kitts and Nevis. I mean, poets, people who write and publish poetry,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I'm tired of it. I told the minister that I wanted to leave about 3 years ago, well, before COVID, and he said, please turn on. The challenge was to find someone who would take it on, and that was a challenge because at some point I'd wanted to end the poetry. Because again, I was start listen. When you do a monthly poetry event, it takes at least 2 weeks to do that. There are 4 weeks in the month.
Hmm.
Getting the venue, getting the chairs, getting it's a labor of love. Um, and I want to do other stuff. I want to have like every 2 years have an event where you have a theater production, an original film production, and poetry. Like over a long weekend, have that kind of festival. That's what I'm looking at. I also try to get a Jewish museum going, and I that started because one day I was going into my vehicle and I saw a for sale sign on what was part of the remnant of the Jewish synagogue, which is across the street from the old Jewish museum.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's, if you know the history of different families in Nevis, you will know which families grew out of that community. And my mother's family came out of that community. My mother's youngest brother is 96 in London. And he was telling me that when he was 4 years old, he was walking down the street in Brownhill with his parents. And his dad said to him, "You see those reds over there? Pass them straight. Do not say anything to them." Because, in Nevis, you have to say good morning to everyone.
Mm.
And those Reds were his family. And they kicked him out of the family because he married Josephine Webb from Church Ground, who was probably the darkest woman in Nevis.
Mm.
We ain't having
Ah,
that. He
Mm.
followed his heart, yes. So
Mm.
I have, and it's interesting. I've met a couple of people who are Jewish who have told me, I have this friend from Toronto, and she said, "Yeah, you're Hebe." And she said to me, "Yeah, there's something about your energy and the shape of your head. I have no idea what that is." She said, "You're Hebe."
What?
And I met this. I met this woman who's a writer from New York, and I asked her about it, and she said, "That's interesting because I was here listening to you and thinking this guy sounds Jewish," but she was saying a lot of it has to do with because a lot of Jewish guys grew up in going to shul and studying the Talmud and the Torah, which has to do with knowing how to interpret what does this word mean, what does this sentence mean, and it gives you a certain kind of training. Well, I have a library of 3,000 books. I am concerned with words, which is why so many contract lawyers are Jewish guys, because they know how to read a contract. What does this phrase mean? What does it mean when you have these words in this sequence? And if you spend your whole life growing up studying the Talmud and the Torah, and that's what it's about, there's a certain kind of turn of mind which you can call Jewish, which because it's concerned with words. And but I wanted to start this museum, this small museum, because just shortly before I'd seen the sign, the for sale sign, I'd read an article where there were some guys, some Jewish people from New York, who had gone to Jamaica and they had been brought there by the Ministry of Tourism because they work in synagogues in Jamaica. And when I lived in Toronto, I met people who were named Levy and so on, who looked like me, were dark, but they were Jewish.
Mm.
Their grand or great grandparents had probably gone from Germany or somewhere and gone to Jamaica, married, intermarried, and but still kept up the religion. But there are people here, the Powells, the Claxtons,
Mm.
who came out of that community. The Howells, I think, also came out of that community. So if you know the histories of the different families, you would know which families um, go back to that community. So I have the guy who was helping me, who was Jewish, who was from Canada, passed away. So that the idea would have been to have obtained the land and put a small Jewish museum on it, because I figured if even if you had just 150 Jews visiting Nevis each year to visit this museum, Nevis is small enough for them to make an impact on the economy. That was the
Mm.
thinking behind it. And I still do have that vision, that dream of having a Jewish museum
So
in
Nevis.
Nevis.
So when you're finished with the poets, so what are you going to do next? Are you done with the arts, or will you be contributing in some other form?
No, no, no. I have curatorial projects to do at the gallery.
Mm.
I have. I'm still writing. I have a book to. I'm looking for a publisher. I'm always involved in art. It's just that it became tiresome, you know, doing poets in the square. and I found someone I think is capable of carrying it on. And I will still be reciting poetry. I probably
How
still make references to them. Yeah.
so how are we gonna improve um the creative side of Nivisions moving forward then? And you're gonna try to
Train up
work
a
with the
child in the
government?
way. Train up a child in the way it should grow, so that when it's old, it won't depart from it. So
Was
you have
not
to
the
start it in
platform.
the schools. Yeah, you start it in the schools, and I don't.
Mm,
The I went to Barbados because if you want your book in the schools, you have to go to CXC, which is in Barbados.
mm-hmm,
There's a guy who's from these parts there, and he read my book, and he told me my book won't be chosen because it's not seen as typical of what they regard as West Indian poetry, which is okay. I
mm,
take that as a compliment, actually. But you just have to start either competition or poetry in the schools because you see, to motivate people, you have to have a carrot, and if there's a prize, you will get people. And if you have 10 people doing it, maybe just one, if you've only one or two carried on into their 20s and the 30s, then you have accomplished something. I had a very interesting talk. Roll Isaac picked me up outside my house, and this was just before Poets in the Square. And I was telling him, of the hundreds of people who come by, walk by, if you get 20 who came to hear the poetry, and he said, boy, that's a lot. Because poetry is an acquired taste.
mm-hmm.
The 10 years in which I did the monthly poetry event, the audience was usually around 12 to 18 people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's surprising to me. I'm gonna tell you that.
When you say, what is so surprising, what do you mean?
That you had
That it's,
like you have almost 12, 20 people to that monthly poisons. I just never like I grew up in Nevis.
yes,
And growing up in Nevis, I can't recall a poetry community. I can't
there wasn't
recall.
one.
Yeah, I can't recall being in school and poetry is a thing. Poetry, I think the only time I had to deal with poetry was maybe third form literature, and I had to um
And this,
comprehension or something.
the
So,
sad thing is, and I speak as someone who's been writing poems for 40 years, there's so many gifted poets in Nevis. And
mm-hmm.
it's like, do you know Melissa Forbes? No, that's Melissa Swaby. And I call her
Number.
name.
So,
She has a store on the main street at the bottom of, your wife might know because she sells stuff for ladies for their hairs and so on. She has a
mm,
daughter who is so gifted, and it's like if people are gifted, they think it's nothing. But that woman was part of my poetry, and it's like, it's just poetry. But you listen to her poetry, and you want an
mm-hmm.
18-year-old writes this, an 18-year-old wrote this. My goodness, it's. But there's no incentive built into the society to encourage the arts per se. The arts is seen as being an adjunct or superfluous, or you can't make a living from. But listen, that lamp, I'm telling you, that young lady's her painting, she got at least $5,000 for that take home, more than that at least. You
Wow.
know. Now there's no money in poetry. Let's face it, because when I started out, I was trying to find a publisher. Agents will tell you no children's book, no poetry, because you cannot sell 200,000 of these.
Mm,
So you don't do it for money, but it's. I think that the value. I think that the role that art plays is that it. The Bible says man cannot live by bread alone, and there's
mm-hmm.
an aspect of us. There's an aspect to human beings which needs to be nurtured and fed. And at its highest pitch, that is what art does. Art feeds that part of us, our souls. In other words, I have a saying: music is. I think it's a. On music is the poetry is the music of the soul. You know, it to survive, we need not only to feed our
Hmm.
physical bodies, but to feed our spiritual bodies. And I think that that's what art does. And when a society does not have art, does not acknowledge some as art in whatever form, music, painting, poetry, even the dumbed down version of what you call empty music, it does at some level feed our souls. And I think that that's what art does. And we suffer as a people when we do not attend to that kind of food, when we do not feed our souls.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, uh, that's deep. That's true. We're
That's deep. That is deep.
yeah, suffer as people when you do not feed your souls.
I'm sorry, what?
No, I was just the last part is um, profound actually. Suffer
Yeah.
as a people. Yeah, when you and I mean we're feeding our souls with all kind of different things. Just bread alone. That's what it
Yeah.
is. Bread alone.
I had a very interesting conversation um, for the past 2 years for Carnival and for Culturama. James Galloway, who works with King Astro, asked me and other actors to enact um, one of his songs. And I remember asking him, saying, because one of the idea I have is to have a bike race in Nevis, because 10 years ago, you used to have all these kids riding bikes races around the island. And I asked him about it. And you know what he said? I said, you don't see that anymore. And he said this: this keeps
Very
people inside and detached from nature. And it's sad because
very
look, there's a guinea tree down the road and the guineps on it rotted. You
very
know, you
true.
find tamarind trees and they're rotted. People don't eat fruits. Kids don't eat fruits anymore. And the connection to the planet, where you realize that when you eat fruit in season, it helps the body to grow. It helps the body to clean itself. That has been lost.
Hmm.
And it's been lost because, hey, I
That's
mean,
true.
listen, don't get me wrong. This is profound and it has moved us along, but it has come at a price, and we have to be able to acknowledge that price. And the question is, how as a society you move forward, but don't think of progress when you use the word progress. It's a way to abandon your past.
Hmm.
You know, it's a very interesting challenge we have in our society, and I don't know how we can or will meet it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I mean, and we're gonna have to wrap up soon as we
Yeah,
have
it's
our
we have 14
second
minutes.
second show coming up. So
Oh,
we're
you're
gonna
oh.
yeah we have a running show after this show. And
Connected to
uh,
this or another show?
uh another show.
Okay.
Another show.
Well,
Yeah.
since the first poem I did was from this book. Let me recite
But
since
before
the. Oh, hold on.
before
Go
you
ahead. Yes,
recite
sorry.
it, I have a question. I know you said that you're are they still on Amazon? And you had some work on Amazon. Are they still on Amazon? Are
Yes,
they still available?
these were. I don't think, because the publisher went out of business.
Hmm.
And they referred me to a business. I don't even remember the name. And I kept calling and calling. And you're speaking to a damn computer. A computer can't have a conversation. I said,
Yeah.
I've had enough of this. So if anyone out there is interested in becoming my publisher, I'm open to negotiation. Yes.
What about self-publishing? You have ever?
Well, this is actually self-published, but they
Hmm.
handled all the production end of it. They're called, what were they called? My goodness. They did manuals and textbooks and so on, and they had a small imprint called what was it called? Inkwater Press out of Oregon. Very good people.
Mm-hmm.
I got them through Lachlan Tatum, who is a novelist and poet and playwright in St. Kitts. But they were very, very efficient, very, very good. And they allowed me because the title is Sky Blue Roof, and what I wanted, what I envisioned was a blue background and entrails writing the title. They said they didn't have the technical facility to do that. So in going back and forth, I said, so how about if I take a picture of a painting and send it? And they said, sure. So I took a picture of my favorite painting, which is on the wall behind here, and did that. So when it came second time to do the second one, I got, oh, hold on. This is a detail from another one of my paintings. And I have, you know, Corey Tyson
Mm-hmm.
and Abernathy. I did. The woman who got me to publish, her name is Meredith Warner Phipps. She is a poet. I think the book is called A Walk Through My Mind, and I knew her as a child
Mm-hmm.
before we went to Canada. And she told me, you have a very nice voice, and it would help if some of your poems were recorded. So this was when you could still put stuff on CDs. And this is also from another painting of mine. And so I have some of my poems on a CD, and the cover is, the artwork is from another piece of my artwork. So
Okay. Okay.
it was
Were you going? No,
it
you were
was
about
done
to
in
read another
hours.
piece.
Yes, yes, yes. I can
Mm-hmm.
recite it actually because I know it because I'm going to read. I'm going to read one for the ladies and
Okay.
then one for the guys. What? I've forgotten the title of it. It's I write this stuff. I just write the stuff. I don't know the titles. Let me see if I find it. It's called. It's talking about amongst others. Yeah, getting going on. Once perfect. I'm also going to depths unknown. Here it is, 42. Actually, I should probably recite another one because that's the first poem I got a reaction to. Anyway, this goes.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "Depths unknown." Maybe I should.
Let's hear it.
And yet, when we spoke, you did not say. We danced around the point. You wanted to go, and I would have followed, but we stayed. We stood on the beach alone, the waves caressing our feet, holding us fast to the spot. You hid your eyes behind tortoiseshell rims, the ones you said made you look pretty. You like them. You wore rings on your thumbs. Sometimes, when you were reading and they caught your eye, you would stop, your eyes swimming from the words to the rings to the words. They held you in place, though your heart would float free. Your lips, two roses held close, parted in a smile when you spoke. She looks intelligent, is what they always said about you. You were pretty, but coursing through your heart were depths unknown. You lived as though washed in respect. You looked unapproachable, cold, aloof. But looks can kill, and yours killed stares of indifference. Even as a little girl, they called you Miss. It held you in check, somewhere between respect and solitude. You bantered with yourself, trying to find a space in your heart, in your mind, where the room was round enough to hold you. You wished you were shorter. You wanted your hair to be longer. But these were asides. You knew the truth. It told a story which you loved because it called your beauty true, and you knew it too.
All right. Good stuff. Yeah, it's supposed to snap. That's how you
Yeah.
cheer,
Um,
cheer.
I'm going to do two more. One for the guys, because whenever I
Mm-hmm.
write this, I read this. Some guy would always shout because he gets it, and then I'll read the title poem of the second collection. So, how
Mm-hmm.
much time do we have? Oh, we have enough time.
Yeah.
Um,
Good night,
my ears are
Iona.
very small. I need to get proper earbud. Anyway,
Eh,
it's
that's why I
called.
don't wear earbuds.
It's what is it called? I never know the titles, but here's how it goes. I did I did bad things, sold pain, gave hurt, sinned my soul and caused tears to flow. I knew all the lies, told them well, vied against what's current, drank from many wells. I knew I was wrong, but told myself it's all for love. But I lied and knew the truth, even as I knelt. There were flowered kisses and candled nights, sweet hued words served to thrill green appetites. It was all a dream, or so I pretended. The lies grew longer, more empty, as I grew older. Between your thighs, I had begun the journey, the search for meaning, or at least that's what I told myself. But I knew all along it was me and you and the truth. The flesh was weak, but oh, so sweet. Usually at the point, some guy says, yes,
Wow.
flesh was weak.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that one. We were muted, so you didn't get the reaction. I didn't want any sounds in our background to interrupt you. But I was over
Oh,
here,
okay, okay.
like, oh, okay, yeah,
So the
all
last
right.
one is the title poem
Mm-hmm.
um, for the book, and it's called Once When We Were Young. Let me- Once when we were young, the future seemed limitless in her promise. We'd sail through life confident that even in the roughest seas, we'd come through unbowed. Youth held our skin taut, our eyes saw all and more, we sang for joy, and our tears dried before they'd fall. We were happy. Then life would intervene to remind us that each one of us has an appointment to keep. We see it every day. Someone leaves, and in leave taking remind us that one day our time too shall come. Grain here, a paunch too far, nephews and nieces who remind us we can never be alone come between us and our appointment. They keep us engaged in the show until it's time to go. We make a ritual of our leave taking. We remember only the good deeds, what of our lives touched and sustained others. We flatter ourselves with the hope that time shall have been kind to us. But the consistent heartbeat in all of our lives is the circle completed. We see it 1,000 times, and it's the same every day and everywhere. Over there, we shall meet again. It seems too much of a shock to let go and to do so without hope. So we sing of meeting on the beautiful shore. We pray that our souls would rest in eternal peace, or at least find rest from earthly chore. We live in hope that there's more to life than the finality of death, and so we worship a Savior who rose on the third day and assures us too that if he, the Son of Man, can live again, then so can we. We live and in living rejoice, for we believe we cannot know that here, when we depart, our bark shall alight on some distant welcoming golden shore. But can we be sure? There is no certainty in what happens after death, but we hope as when we were young for the best. Our hope sustains us.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Wow,
Mm.
I like
Mm.
that one. I
Going
like that
deep.
one. I like that one. That one was
Yeah,
deep.
man. Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Thank you.
had a few
Yeah.
Christian references in there. I like. I like
Yeah.
that.
You can tell
I
my
like.
parents are ministers, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. So, speaking of, yeah, yeah. I liked
Wow.
it. I liked it.
Thank
Jesus
you.
wept. Jesus wept. No, so P. Clayton Huggins, thank you
Yeah.
for joining us tonight. We were enlightened. Uh, there, there's so much more that we really need to like dive into when it comes to art,
Yes.
and especially art
Yes.
and Nevis. But I just
Mhm.
want to say thank you for your contribution in trying to keep the arts alive and bringing the arts to people of Nevis in different forms. Like I told you, me growing up, there was never a poetry community.
Mhm.
I never knew there was a gallery in Nevis. You, as the director of the gallery, I would encourage anyone to visit the gallery once the gallery is up and going. I don't know when your show ends and when the next one starts, but it is located by the old sports museum. I don't know if the sports museum is still there, but just across
No,
from the
it's
D
not.
Walwyn. Okay, so it's in the building where the sports museum used to be.
Yes,
Okay,
on the other
yeah,
end. Yes, next to the taxi stand.
yeah, next to the taxi stand, across from the AL Evelyn building, across from the D
Yes.
Walwyn building. We know artists such as Van Anslil, and
Yes.
stuff like that. So
We have had his
um,
paintings in the gallery.
yeah, and so I'm just going to let you say your last words on here, and then we have to exit out because it's 9 o'clock and we have to get the next show
Yes.
started. So
Well,
go ahead.
I'm not connected to your audience. I don't see them. I don't, but I thank them for listening and for paying attention. And have a good night.
All right.
And
Thank
thanks
you.
for having me.
Reese.
Not at all.
All
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you for being here with us. Your poems, the last three that you recited to us, they
Yeah.
were really good, especially the last one. The last one
Thank you.
showed a lot of the last one showed a lot of your upbringing. And
Yes.
in life, everything comes full circle, and
Yeah.
that poem
Yes.
did that. So I would like to say thank you. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here with
Uh,
us
You're
and
welcome.
keep up the good work. You definitely are a gifted individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Must say that. All right. Thank you. And yes, stick and stay for those. We're up next is the topics. So we're out.
Ooh.